Welcome back to another episode of the In the Clutch podcast. It's week 3 of the high school football season here in Central Illinois. I'm joined by my partners here at Clutch Sports Media, Gavin Russell, Cody Roskins back here. Talk about another great week of high school football in the books, but an even bigger one on deck. It's rivalry week, not just at high school level. As you see, Cody Roskins, he got the Iowa State jersey on. Cyclones take on the Hawkeyes this week. The Bears play the Packers this week. We got two other great rivalries in the high school level, both in Peoria and in Normal. Guys, it's going to be an awesome week.
It's going to be a lot of fun, John, and you can go Friday, Saturday, Sunday with great rivalry football. So kick off your 3-day football weekend with Clutch Sports, and got some good ones on tap. 2 games to choose from. If you're just a high school football fan in general, might want to think about jumping back and forth or having a couple devices on hand to watch a couple of great games at one time.
No, for sure, John. It's going to be a really good weekend for football across the country, whether it's high school, college, or pro, and it's just can't wait for it to get on our way.
Sure to be a good one. Guys, we'll kind of start by talking about our games last week, but obviously before that, real quick, want to mention our games this week in case you didn't see, but you probably did if you're following us on social media. Washington and Metamora can watch that game live and for free on ciproud.com. We'll be bringing you that one, and at the same time, we'll have Normal Community and Normal West. You can watch that one on clutchsportsil.com or on our YouTube page. And obviously, after Washington and Metamora is done, we'll have that game uploaded to our YouTube as well. So it's going to be a great Friday of action. Clutch Sports Media has you covered. But guys, before we dive into this week, let's talk about last week a little bit. Obviously, our games we broadcasted last week. Cody, you and I were at Washington, Kankakee. Gavin, you were up the road at Rock Island, Dunlap. Cody, we'll start with Washington and Kankakee. Real defensive battle. The scoring came quick, but it was still a really interesting game. Really captivating for it being so low scoring.
Yeah, we kind of went into that game, a bunch of headline athletes we all thought were going to have a chance to really put their stamp on the game, but ultimately it was, I guess, their lack of stamp on the game that kind of carried the focus. I think we had our 2 scoring plays come in 15 seconds of each other, and one of them wasn't even an official time down with the kick return going all the way back right after Washington went 3-0 on the field goal. Phillips had a really nice looking 97-yard kick return for a touchdown. But I think what really impressed me in that match was Washington's defense. All we heard all week heading into that match was how fast Kankakee was and how their speed could present problems. And Washington's defense looked every bit up to the challenge. I was a little underwhelmed with Kankakee, to be honest with you, but at the same time, for as well as Washington's defense played in that game and the amount of chances that linebacking core gave them, their offense just could never put it together until that last drive, and it took a couple of 4th down conversions to keep them in it on that last drive. But it was a really well-fought game. I didn't think either team really walked away too disappointed. Maybe just some things they want to clean up on offense.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, I was calling the game with you, and kind of going to their offense. Obviously, Washington, a very good offense in their own right, led by their all-conference running back Kaden McQuarrie, whose name you've probably heard quite a bit so far this season. You're probably going to hear a lot more, especially this coming Friday. But overall, him and the rest of the Panthers' offense was pretty limited. Washington going with a pretty ground-heavy attack, at least so far in the first 2 weeks of the season. I'd be interested to see how that continues and maybe how they incorporate their quarterback Tyler Humphrey into the ground game as well. I don't know if you share the same sentiment at all, but
yeah, I think really where we saw Humphrey excel was the quarterback run game. You could tell both offenses, Kankakee and Washington, were very limited and were struggling offensively through the air. And so, always the great maturation of a young quarterback is how else can he help win you a game? And Humphrey showed more than enough ability to move the ball with his legs. He didn't take horrible sacks. He kept the offense in large part in time and on a rhythm. It was just a couple penalties here and there, or running out of time on downs to kind of help them move that along. I think down the road Middle Illini play, because we'll probably see Washington again at some point this season. I'd be interested to see how well that aerial attack develops, because if that gets going, Washington's going to be a tough out in the Middle Illini and maybe the runaway favorite.
I think so. I think it really all comes down to the passing game for Washington. I think all their other bases are pretty well covered. Gavin, we'll head on over to your game, Rock Island and Dunlap. Again, I was able to watch part of that game. Dunlap jumped out to pretty big lead right away. Looked like it might be a runaway, but Rock Island kind of hung around in that game.
Yeah, Rock Island was definitely around, and I think that Rock Island is in a rebuilding phase of sorts. You know, you lose head coach Ben Hammer as he moved on to a high school, I believe, in Florida. But, you know, just kind of introducing a lot of new things. Fritz Diodonde trying to bring the Rocks program back to what Ben Hammer had it as, and he's got a lot of new starters to work with, a lot of really young players. So not an easy test to go on the road, especially suffering a big week one loss. Rock Island really stepped it up in the second half. It was kind of a tale of two halves. They just couldn't put the scoring together quite enough to get it done. But for Dunlap, they did what they needed to do. You know, maybe some things to clean up, but it's early in the season. You know, you might want to clean some of the penalties up, maybe a turnover or two here and there. But at the end of the day, they really got it done. Kendall Netters was incredibly impressive. They got it done with the ground game. They got it done with the defense. Dunlap showing why they're a very versatile team, and it was an exciting game. Hopefully, you know, you were able to tune in for one game or the other, because we had a couple of good ones last week.
Yeah, and you know Dunlap, obviously the preseason hype around them was they have just so many weapons on offense. They have a really deep receiving core. Obviously, they have two quarterbacks, Johnny Bargan and Max Setter, who I understood both got some playing time on Friday. But really, so far in the season for Dunlap, it's been that three-headed rushing attack of transfer Jackson Oldham, who came up from Florida, a big power back that had played really well in week one. And you obviously got Kendall Netters, who had some long touchdown runs, and then Joe Weeks as well, who's also scored already twice so far this year. Has been great at linebacker for them. Gavin, just overall your takeaways from the Dunlap backfield, which has been really good so far this year.
Yeah, I was going to say first about the passing attack. The passing attack was virtually, it was not present at all last Friday. I mean, there was nothing going on there. They did try to open it up. A few overthrows, by Sutter, by Bargan. Now they're really good throws, mind you. Just couldn't quite hook up with the receivers, and that'll get cleaned up. They're going to find their stride there. The Rocks probably had that on the scouting report that hey, we need to defend the pass pretty heavily. But where that lacked and where that may lack in some weeks, that three-headed rushing attack is going to be big because you don't know who it's going to be that's going to take off any given week. Week one, it was Oldham. Week two, it was Netter. So you really don't know what you're going to get. And I think for Brett Caslett, he's just going to kind of ride the hot hand. Whoever gets the early touches, whoever makes the most of it early in the game, that's going to be the player that's going to get the most touches and can hurt you any given week.
Certainly, it's going to be also a good season as well for the Dunlap Eagles. They play a Pekin. That should be a good game coming up this week. I think one that could be overshadowed, but nonetheless has a lot of implications. After that, though, Dunlap gets Limestone, Canton, and East Peoria. So, guys, I don't know about you, but I think those are some winnable games for Dunlap if they can get past Pekin. And they could potentially head into a Week 7 game against Washington at 6-0. So, guys, obviously want to move on to our next kind of segment of the show. Obviously, there's more games around the area, more than just the two that we broadcasted. Who are maybe some other teams that impressed you from Week 1's action, or Week 2's action, I should say?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the East Peoria Raiders. The Raiders going for their second straight year, taking a win against Aurora Central Catholic, and again, not the most standout opponent. They're a smaller school. They've kind of fallen away from what they were a few years ago. But nevertheless, for an East Peoria team that went several seasons and 20-plus games without a win, really starting to find a little more consistency with that. They've tasted success a little bit. So now that they're getting into a little bit of rhythm, and then 2 years in a row against a win against an opponent, that's definitely a big step in the right direction for them. Not to mention, it wasn't just a win. They didn't eke out a 7-6 win, on a Friday night. They put up big numbers. The most points they've scored in a single game, I believe it was 57 points. That's the most they've scored since 1998, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of us were probably alive last time they did that. So East Peoria certainly setting the tone a little bit there. Again, you consider the opponent a little bit, but they're starting to figure themselves out, and probably that was their biggest thing for so many years. They beat themselves on a lot of occasions. They couldn't figure it out as a program. Well, Dustin Jefferson finally figuring it out as a team, getting the culture set over there. They're starting to get things rolling on the east side. Now, again, a long way to go. Got to get some numbers up. They're still a young team, but hey, you never know. The Raiders could surprise you on a Friday night.
Yeah, the Raiders are the top scoring offense in the Mid-Atlantic right now. Believe it or not, it's the Raiders through 2 weeks have scored the most points. Definitely a team to keep an eye on for sure and see how they progress. Cody, Gavin went east over to East Peoria. You're going, from what I heard, you're going west with your team that impressed this past week.
Yeah, so I'm going with Knoxville. Kind of going a little bit of small school action, but Knoxville 2-0 start to the season. They've taken down EB, who we were all kind of high on to begin the year. They took down EB week one, only held them to 8 points, and then they took down Macomb, who was a real power last season as well. And so they're off to a really good start. They get Princeville this week. I was kind of flirting back and forth with we'll tease it in a little bit, but our under the radar game. But could this game itself be an under the radar game with the Princes? And you get two 2-0 teams. Princeville's coming off a big win again last week, but I really like what the Blue Bullets are doing. Knoxville's trending in the right direction, and they're looking to have a really special season early.
Yeah, I think the key for Knoxville is obviously just keep it up and have that Week 90 game against Farmington circled on your calendars. That's a game that I mentioned. Kind of looking back at each team, looking forward for all 31 teams. In case you didn't see, John Dog's notebook through 2 weeks is now on CSM Overtime. I gave my thoughts about local teams through the 2 weeks and what you should be watching out for, what's been big for all 31 teams in our coverage area. My team that impressed me this past week was Normal West. They played Bloomington, won 35-14, and that was a game where coming in, obviously everyone kind of knows that Bloomington's improved this year, but we didn't quite know how much they were improved. Were they at Normal West level? And I still think the Purple Raiders are a really good squad this year and are going to be trending upwards. But Normal West really impressed me. Obviously, after losing a lot of their defense from last year, some pieces on offense, they came in and it was tight after the first quarter, but then they really ran away with it later in the first half. Johnny Fryman, who won a offseason quarterback battle against Drew Mangrum, really impressed me. He's completed 20 of 24 passes for over 200 yards and threw 3 touchdowns, all of them to wideout Sincere Brown, who is one of many good pass catchers that the Wildcats have. So if you're looking for some of the best receiving cores in the area, you may think, Peoria High and Dunlap. Put Normal West in that conversation as well. I think that's going to be really key for the Wildcats this week as they go up against Normal Community. Normal West, I believe, is in the top 10 in Class 6A. Can't remember exactly where they are ranked, but again, you can't sleep on Normal West at all. So, obviously, as we kind of look forward to as we begin to look forward to our games next week, still want to look back at a team that impressed us last week, the Morton Potters. Guys are off to a 2-0 start. Real quick, you guys, what have you seen so far from them? They took down Rochelle 27-26 last week.
Potters have been really impressive. Adam O'Neill's really come in there and just done big things. The Potters have always been a competitive group. They get a lot of support from the community, and certainly why they're one of the better faces of the Mid-Atlantic Conference football-wise. But they seem to have just taken a different gear here early in the season. And, you go back to when they had the Seth Glatz. They made that deep run into the state playoffs a couple seasons ago. That was a really good team. But I think now as a whole, outside of just a few standout players, this is a team top to bottom that can be successful. And again, a lot of guys you can look at, a lot of guys we can touch on, and I'm sure we will continue to do as we get more into the season. But nevertheless, the 2 standout wins early in the season for Morton, I think that should put aside any questions. Morton is more than a playoff team this year. They're a team that can really try to make a run at this, and not a team that everybody expected. But that doesn't matter to them. The Potters are just looking to come to play every week.
Yeah, you guys have kind of hit it on the head already. They started off, 2 really good wins to begin the year, and that's all well and good. But sooner or later, they're going to get into one of the more fun conferences and more competitive conferences here in a couple weeks, so they'll have to buckle up. But I think they've really built a good foundation early in the season. What's the old saying in the MLB? You can't win a pennant in was it like the first 2 months, but you can definitely lose one. Well, they haven't lost anything in the first 2 weeks, and so they're definitely setting themselves up for success late.
Yeah, 2 wins against some top 10 teams. in their respective classes in the state. Really impressive for the Potters. I got the chance to sit down with Morton head coach Adam O'Neill, along with breakout star running back Shondon Buffington and offensive lineman Luke Benders, and discuss their hot start to the season. You can watch that coming up right here. Obviously, those first 2 weeks were obviously really stand out. I made me guys, you made me look like a fool because in our CSM pick'em the first week I picked Muhammad, and that was a stupid pick in hindsight. So you guys made me look stupid there, which I'm fine with. I'm super glad you guys got that win and everything. It's kind of take me through that win a little bit from your guys' perspective, and first game of the year against a really good team. What do you guys think you did well, and just kind of maybe take me through that game a little bit.
Go ahead.
I think the first half we didn't come out too strong. We came off on the field the first drive pretty slow, and that caused us to get stopped. But then our defense kept battling and kept it to 1 point in the whole first half. And then we go in the locker room, and as I said earlier, we all have this motivation and drive that we're going to do great things in the second half and fix all our technique. And then we come out and it shows, and we win by a touchdown.
Yeah, and Coach, did you get them all riled up with a big halftime speech at all in that game, or?
No, I don't think so. I think we talked about we were playing a quality opponent, and we expected to be in the game, and we expected it to be tough, and we felt like we were playing really good defense, and that I think we had to fix something in the run game, and once that was fixed, we were off to the races in the second half. We just had to make an adjustment. We didn't quite understand the defense they ran was it's a little bit different than some other people do, and once Sean and Brett understood the path a little better, I think it opened things up. So we felt like we were going to be able to compete with anybody that we played with, and we were right there in a game with a ranked team that's won 22 games in the last 2 years, and we expected to be there. Yeah, no, for sure. That was certainly a great win for you guys. Obviously, you guys have made some really clutch plays, especially late in games from what I've seen this year as well, and obviously against Rochelle as well. Also just kind of maybe take me through that game a little bit. Was maybe any similarities from the first game? Just kind of what was thrown at you guys that game? How did you respond? And overall, what did you guys like out of yourselves in that game?
Well, I would say Rochelle is definitely a lot more physical than Muhammad was. So they were running the wing tee, so they were taking a lot of time off the clock and keeping the ball for a while. So our offense didn't have much time with the ball. So in the first half, we punted a few times, but we kept it relatively close. And again, at halftime, we went in, and there was no really big halftime speech, but it was the same thing that we could tell we're going to go out and have a big second half. And then they ended up having the ball almost more than double the amount we did, but we made big plays when we had the ball. So the O-line and receivers really helped block, so that popped off some really big plays for me and Brett.
You guys have a real good non-conference resume, but I know that this is kind of when it really gets started. Obviously, you're at the Mid-Illini season coming up. I know you guys still have your your first Mid-Illini game coming up against I believe Canton this week, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Or okay, gotcha. But yeah, just kind of overall, with through 2 weeks, I know it's still early in the season, but what have you guys just kind of seen overall from the Mid-Illini? Has anything surprised you at all across the conference in 2 weeks? And you look at it's kind of what are you looking forward to when conference play starts?
I think most weeks you're going to have to really come to play, and it really well coached teams in the Mid-Illini, and you see that in their non-conference schedule. There's been some maybe some surprising wins. I don't think anybody in the Mid-Illini probably surprised, but you're going to see quality opponents most weeks, and you got to come ready to play.
For sure. And Luke and Shondon, overall, you guys have any thoughts about that? You're just around the conference, and then also just your conference season coming up, or?
We're just gonna have to come ready to play. No, we've been working the whole off season on getting better, so we should be ready.
really, Sean, the first question I guess that we had for you was, I mean, overall, I mean, like, what part of your game did you work on over the off season? And, do you think, and how that maybe contribute to your success so far this year?
Well, we started this summer with a lot of speed training. So we timed 40s almost every week. So I'd say we definitely all worked on speed, and that's definitely shown up in all levels of our game.
Yeah, no, definitely. And coach, I mean, like, what I mean, because before the season, and obviously when I was over to you guys' practice back a while ago, I was talking with the guys, and one of the guys, I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been Brett. He said, Sean, he's like, we also had another running back, Sean in Buffington. He's a dog, and up until that point, I had never heard of Sean in before, but he just burst onto the scene this year. What notable differences have you just kind of seen in him so far this year? I know you're coming in as a new coach, but just what have you kind of just seen from him?
When I came in and reviewed the tape in the spring, he showed up in the JV games. He was a difference maker in the JV games, and you could see he was ready for varsity action. He competed, he played a quarterback, he handled the ball, he did a lot of things. So he was really involved in the underclass game. So and he competed for that spot a little bit in the summer. But he's filled out some, and I think as a whole, our speed, we put a big focus on that, like Shannon said, and I think you see it across the board. His is definitely showing up on some of the long runs, and the other thing is the other kids getting involved in that too. We're getting big blocks down the field from kids with their speed improvements too.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Shandon, I know. I mean, just looking at your stat lines, that for the last couple weeks. I mean, I think I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know like they're both at least 100. Like you're putting 160, 180, like type yard games. Just right away. I mean, did any of this come as a surprise or a shock to you at all, or?
Not necessarily. We worked really hard this summer, and we went to several different people's places and practice with them. So we knew that we were going to have to put up big numbers on offense, and with the O line, we've been working. We had film almost all the time, so we've been working hard to get this going. And having two running backs like me and Brett, it's pretty hard to stop us. So.
And Luke, I mean, for you, I know last year you guys had a pretty good running back duo. You had Carl and Brett, and now you got Brett and Shandon again. Just, I mean, overall, I mean, just what's it like having those guys in the backfield?
It's amazing. It makes our job way easier knowing that we have two absolute brutes back there that are hard to take down with negative yards.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a lot of positive gains for sure. And, I mean, overall, I mean, I know Morton has a reputation for being the hogs and everything like that. It's kind of, what kind of training, what sort of sets that group that you guys have apart from anybody else, do you think?
I think the biggest thing that we do that most other schools don't is we're lifting 4 to 5 days a week, in season, off season. We're doing speed training all summer and even in season as well. So I think that sets us apart and just gives us an edge over all these other teams.
Guys, it was really fun to talk with the Potters, getting to know about them and just their hot start to the season, looking inside what their year has been like so far. But now we're kind of transitioning into looking forward to this week. Guys, one of our segments we did last year that we really liked was 3 words or less to describe something about the upcoming week. It's a big one for sure. Guys, what do you got?
Boy, put me on the spot here, John. I was kind of formulating my 3 words. I think that I'm just going to go back to what we already talked about, big rivalry matchups, because it seems like at almost every level, whether you've got, of course, our 2 games here, I think of even probably the lower level teams, East Peoria and Limestone, that's still a rivalry game. I think that a lot of teams are coming out and playing a rivalry game here in week 3, start of conference schedule. For some teams, I think that Dunlap and Pekin is certainly considered a rivalry game, although I'd go on a limb and say just about every Mid-Illini conference matchup is probably a rivalry in some sense for most of these schools. So, you've got a lot of that rivalry action going on here in week 3. And, even aside from that a little bit, you've just got a lot of teams that are, with big games this week. And you look at, Princeville and Knoxville, and maybe we'll touch on some of those, under the radar games later on. But, there's just a lot of rivalry and a lot on the line here in week 3 for a lot of teams.
Yeah, kind of carrying off of what you said, Gavin. This kind of carries a sentiment across pretty much any game this week because out of what we've seen these first 2 weeks, the passing attacks aren't quite there. So my 3 words are run the ball. So anybody that you two know me, you've done a game with me at the high school level, I'd run the ball every play if I could because I'm a big fan of one of the old armed forces coaches saying when they would run the triple option, 4 things can happen when you pass the ball and 3 of them are bad. So when in doubt, there's a ton of talented running backs in the area. Get them the ball in their hands and let them go to work. A lot of really quality offensive lines too. And so I think that'll go a long way in determining some winners this week in these rivalry matchups.
Yeah, for sure. And, Gavin, obviously you saw the headlines, obviously with all these rivalry matchups. I'm going to say my 3 words right now are no one's out. And I think, obviously, no one's out of contention, 2-3 weeks into the season. Although some people can certainly, they may count some teams out. But, there's still like a lot left to play for. We obviously got a lot better of a picture about what each team will be like through 2 weeks. I think that certainly kind of clears up a foggy mirror, so to say. But obviously, you look at a team like Normal West, like I touched on, for example. Obviously people are looking at Normal Community, Peoria High to win the Big 12, and I certainly think that those are probably the 2 frontrunners. But if Normal West, for example, can pull out a win, who knows what could happen? You also got P&D and Bloomington. The Irish are 2-0 after 2 huge wins, given they were against Manuel and Urbana, but they still nevertheless have looked impressive. So the Irish with the win against Bloomington could really get themselves going, and the same thing goes for the Purple Raiders as well. Pekin, obviously, again, coming off a loss to Belleville East last week, but has a chance to make some noise against Dunlap, put themselves in the Mid-Illini conversation early. So those are just examples. There's many other teams that can still really kind of make a statement here in week 3. But if you're not kind of going right now, if you're 0-2, for example, you gotta start kind of getting going though before the middle of the season kind of hits. Otherwise, it could be too late. So there's still pressure is starting to mount a bit, but there's still lots of times and lots of things to be decided. And these rivalry weeks will certainly give us a clear picture about that. Going into our under the radar games, obviously we know the big ones. We've touched on just about all of them to this point. What are some games that maybe some people might not think about right away that should be captivating some eyes around Central Illinois this week?
Well, I gave a spoiler to it just a moment ago. I couldn't help myself, but Princeville and Knoxville is the game that I'm most certainly locked in on for under the radar. And I don't know how under the radar it is, but probably to, most of the high school football fans that are more focused in on some of these, top games, big schools and stuff. The small schools are going to go a little bit overlooked, but I definitely think that we shouldn't be overlooking the small schools. Princeville and Knoxville both looking to just continue their success here early from the season. I would say maybe Knoxville has the advantage, so to speak, and I do believe I picked them in our CSM Pick'em, which you can check out on CSM Overtime. But I think that that's one of the more even matchups. The Princes, they are on the road, but coming off a week where they beat Havana, Tashawn Kaiser had a great week. He's a running back, really kind of continuing on a tradition of great running backs there in Princeville. And again, Princeville, one of the more fundamentally sound small schools you're going to find around. Again, a great tradition, great history. Knoxville, on the other hand, again, just a great program as well. They're on the home field. So that's going to be an exciting one, and a one that if you're looking just for something a little outside the box for a small school game to watch, that's definitely the one.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of go in a very traditional sense for me in terms of picking my under the radar games. But when in doubt, find the Farmers. I'm going with Farmington and Tuscola. Farmers and Warriors going at it. Farmington's 2-0. Their offense is averaging roughly 40 points a game early. They are looking just as strong as we thought they would. Tuscola 1-1, a 9-win team from a season ago. They've, building off some success from last year, off the 1-1 start this year. That game is kind of sneaky good because if there's a hiccup for Farmington, then that means, like we hinted at earlier, John, that last week of the season could be wide open for one or two teams in contention for that first place spot come conference for the conference in that last week of the season.
Yeah, certainly, that Farmington-Tuscola matchup, certainly a non-conference game that you wouldn't expect these two teams to play. Tuscola, obviously, a little bit south of Champaign, so it's going to be a little bit of a long road trip for the Farmers. I'm curious to see, obviously, Farmington, travels a little bit for sure in the Prairie Land, and, obviously they have some long bus rides, like, for example, to West Hancock or Illini West, but, again, down in Tuscola, it's an unfamiliar territory for them, and, Tuscola's got great tradition. Our Joey Wright, probably, who's down in Champaign, probably knows a lot more about Tuscola than I do. But what I do know is that it's a very good team. They were great last year. Maybe not, at least so far, haven't looked quite as good. And I did pick the Farmers in our CSM pick'em. Lane and Jack Wheelwright, for Farmington have been really impressive at quarterback and running back so far this year. So even though the Farmers got a young team, I still think they're among the favorites in the Lincoln Trail Prairie Land Conference this year. My under-the-radar game, I'm going, for some people, this may be way off the grid, but, we added this school into our coverage area this year, a little bit in the Bloomington Normal direction. I'm going with Olympia down in the Sangamo Conference. They're taking on Athens. Both teams were very good last year. Both teams are state-ranked right now at the moment. Athens in 2A, Olympia in Class 3A. The Sangamo Conference, folks, if you're not familiar with it, it's got some really good football teams. You got Athens, you got Williamsville, who was a state finalist last year. You have Maroa Forsyth, who is probably a lock for being at least a state semifinalist almost every year. And now Olympia is inserting themselves in the conversation after a great playoff run last year. 2-0 to start the season this year. It's going to be a great measuring stick for the Spartans. They have a real tough schedule coming up against those three teams I mentioned. So I'm really excited to see how they fare. Eric Lyons is doing a great job just rebuilding that program down in Olympia. And if you're not familiar with them, that was one of my more favorite team previews that I wrote. You have to scroll down and find it, but it is on CSM Overtime. I had a real great time talking with him. And that should be a really good game down in the Sangamo Conference this week. So, guys, we'll kind of wrap things up. Preview our big games coming up. First, Cody, me and you were on the call at Malone Field, the brand new turf. We get to see it in game action for the first time for Washington and Metamora. What are you kind of expecting in that game?
Well, I was joking with one of my coworkers at Bradley, Colton Kaler's a Metamora grad, and I said, well, if they lose the first Washington Metamora game on the turf, they might have to just dig it up and put the grass back in there because that kind of stuff doesn't last long. And so I think it's going to be a really old-fashioned slug-em-out kind of game based on what we saw last week. Metamora's got a really talented backfield, too. We know Washington's going to go in and try and run the football. This has the feel of a game that's going to go by really quick because the clock will be constantly running. And I just think it's whatever defense or offense can kind of limit the unnecessary stuff. We saw what penalties did in Kankakee, Washington last week. Not that Washington had too many on their end, but we saw how costly it could be for a team like Kankakee or any team that plays Washington down the end because that defense just contains you so well. You can't afford to put yourself behind the sticks. I think ultimately it's going to come down who controls the line of scrimmage and then who has the more disciplined play in terms of penalty yardage. And usually that's how it goes in rivalry games. I will say, though, if you're a team outside of Washington Metamora and you're playing a rivalry game this week, up until last year, I was a freshman in high school the last time Iowa State beat Iowa. So if you're in a bad losing streak against your rival, they come to an end. It's okay. Maybe this is the year, and that's just what these schools, they ought to be telling themselves.
Yeah, I was talking with some Metamora players today. Stopped by to get their thoughts. Also talk with head coach Jerry Grebner. And, the senior class from Metamora, they have not beaten Washington. So that's going to be a lot of extra fuel to the fire. And, Jerry Grebner said that even though they're 2-0, Washington's 1-1, he said they still feel like the underdogs. So they have that fire kind of lit under them. They're going to have a huge crowd. I almost can guarantee it's going to be a sellout standing room only at Malone Field. It's going to be a great atmosphere. Really looking forward to that game. And as far as what we can see on the field, Cody, I think you nailed it on the head. It's going to be really a showdown of, who can run the ball better. Maybe we see a big play here or there, but I think it's going to really come down to who can really keep the ball going on the ground. Gavin, you're at Normal Community and Normal West. You've already seen the Iron Men back in week 1 when they played Sacred Heart Griffin. What are you looking forward to in the battle for Normal?
Yeah, that's big. I will touch briefly on that Washington Metamora just because I'm thinking to myself, hey, it's also the Darryl Crouch farewell tour. So the
Indeed.
forces are clashing here. The Metamora senior class hasn't beat Crouch in his last season. I mean, could you ask for a better matchup at Malone Field? That's gonna be great. But I will be certainly fixing on my game in normal, and you get the crosstown teams going at it. Really, any of those three, Bloomington normal teams, Bloomington normal West. Really, all just bring the fire when they play each other, regardless of the sport. Especially though when you get them on the gridiron. Normal community was all sorts of fired up to come out. They certainly look sharp, playing the reigning 4A state champions. Now, mind you, SHG's had a lot of turnover, and you can go back and rewatch that one, kind of get a sense of that game. But normal community took care of business. All the credit to them. They've got a really, really good attack. In the backfield, passing the ball, they're a complete team, and I think that's the difference. Probably the biggest thing for me is what is it going to look like in the trenches for both of these teams. You can look at Dexter Niekamp of Normal Community. He's an absolute monster. Normal West, on the other hand, has a lot of new faces. They have a lot of guys that could step up, but will they have those guys step up here in week 3? So it's going to come down to the trenches, I think. I think the skill position players will take care of themselves. I'd expect a decently high-scoring matchup, maybe 20 to 30 points for each team. But this game surely is going to be decided by probably no more than a touchdown or two.
I certainly agree there. I think, like you said, Gavin, Washington and Metamora could be a big defensive battle. I do think Community and West might be kind of like a traditional, not even a Big 12 in high school, but Big 12 college football game where it could be a track meet, first one to 50 potentially. Both of those teams have some real high-powered offenses, but you never know what could happen. Obviously, I've had some predictions go awry in the first couple weeks, and really nothing is official until you get on the field Friday night. It's going to be a great slate of games. Week 3, it's still early in the season, but maybe come back to be one of the most important of the entire year. That about wraps it up for this version of In the Clutch podcast. Thanks to my co-hosts, Cody Roskins and Gavin Russell. I'm Jonathan Michaels saying so long. We will see you either on CI Proud or ClutchSportsIL.com or both. Who knows? But either way, it's sure to be a great week of football. And see you next week here on the In the Clutch podcast.